USMAN Garuba went straight from the Olympics with Spain to Houston. So what can the former Real Madrid man bring to the Rockets? This is Floor and Ceiling. Let's break him down. USMAN Garuba was certainly an early bloomer in Spain for Real Madrid, but that does not mean that he cannot also become an impactful player in the NBA. At 6'8", a chiseled 230 pounds, and a 7'2" wingspan, Garuba has similar measurements to Draymond Green. But can he also make his types of winning plays for the Rockets? To understand USMAN Garuba, we must first look at what he brings to the table offensively. You want to keep things as simple as possible for Garuba at this stage of his development. Although it feels like he has been around as a draft prospect forever and he made his Real Madrid debut at 16, Garuba remains incredibly green on offense. Given how many pro minutes he has played so far, that is a little puzzling. You would expect him to be further along on attack. Either way, Garuba is at his best right now, living in the paint and around the rim. If all he has to do is catch and finish or roll hard to the basket, Garuba should be able to do that. You want his percentages to improve, as Garuba shot just 46% from the field in the Spanish League last year. But with a strong upper body and mature physique that is certainly NBA ready, Garuba has the means to get points right at the basket if his guards get him open or if he is getting downhill. On that same note, I expect Garuba to have success as a rim runner at the NBA level. He is legitimately fast and can outsprint his defender from north to south. This should come in handy against slower bigs. Another thing that Garuba excels at near the rim is offensive rebounding. As I will break down later, I have some reservations, but I do think that Garuba is a tenacious and quick rebounder who grinds on the boards. The numbers are not eye-popping, just a hair under 2 offensive rebounds per game in the Spanish League last season, but I think the instincts are there. Garuba has quick hands, knows where to be, and can create second chance opportunities for his team. At times, he's even the one to get the rebound and score himself. Despite his size, Garuba is combative down low, and it is always nice to see that type of effort from a 19-year-old. Watch here, for example, as Garuba is first to the miss. Or here, as he tracks down the shot off the rim and secures the board. Even if he is not able to snatch the rebound every single time, Garuba's level of activity on the glass is impressive. He does not get discouraged and just keeps getting after it. If Garuba ever plays next to Alperen Şengün in Houston's front court, the Rockets will be an instant threat on the offensive glass just by having them both on the floor at the same time. I like this play against Barcelona. Garuba first gets the offensive rebound, but misses the putback. That does not deter him though, as his quick second jump gets another board and he then finishes. But Garuba's offensive game in terms of scoring pretty much stops there. He's shown a few flashes taking the short fadeaway inside the paint here and there, but the sample size is tiny, and his shooting numbers are certainly discouraging. If Garuba can get to the point where he has this short jumper in pick and pop situations, I'm sure that would help him. But if we get into Garuba's range, then it becomes harder to imagine him as a respected pull-up shooter, at least in the short term. Garuba made 31% of his threes last season, which does not seem abysmal, but most of them were spot-ups or wide open. Against better competition in the EuroLeague, he made just 27% of his triples. Garuba's shot is not flawed beyond repair, he has tight mechanics and he tries to hold his follow-through, but he is just too stiff, I feel. Additionally, it does not help that Garuba's free throw numbers have always hovered around the 60-65% mark. I'll be keeping a close eye on his numbers from deep this year, especially since Houston also drafted Şengün, and I don't think they can afford to have 2 non-shooters at the same time. If Garuba's 3-point shooting ever reaches a point where defenders have to close out on him, then the potential does exist for him to make plays like these. Still, those flashes are very rare. Garuba still has to get better not only at becoming more versatile offensively, but also really getting the basics down. That idea also applies to his work down low. For most of his career, Garuba physically dominated his competition. Partly, that's how he was so imposing at the youth level. But now that he does not automatically have that physical advantage, Garuba really has to round out his game. For now, he is still too reliant on just brute strength. Garuba lacks finesse, touch, and craft. He has very few moves, either with his back to the basket or just in the paint overall. Like I said, Garuba cannot just overwhelm his defenders anymore, but it's also worth pointing out that he is not the best vertical athlete. He's fast and strong, but Garuba can't just explode off the floor. since he is not the biggest at 6'8" that can set him back at times. But despite all of Garuba's shortcomings when it comes to scoring, one area of his game that I really appreciate is his passing. I touched on Garuba and Şengün being dominant on the boards if played together, but I also think they can be a really creative front court pairing in Houston. Garuba probably was not utilized as a passer as much as he could have been at Real Madrid, but I have hope that will change in the NBA. He is a legitimately crafty passer who makes up for his lack of creativity scoring with his playmaking. Garuba was not making super flashy reads, but he knows how to be quick and decisive when the ball gets to him. His synergy with Real Madrid's bigs also showed to me that Garuba does not have to be a small ball center to be effective. We've seen him connect with Alex Tyus, but watch these clips. First he sets up Eddie Tavares, and then he cleverly gets Vincent Poirier an open dunk. Again, we see the synergy with bigs here, as he sets up Tyus with a nice pass. Speaking of which, Garuba has potential as a passer out of short rolls. He plays with his head up, and again he is snappy with his execution. For example, watch here as Garuba sets the screen, gets the ball on the move, and finds the tough wraparound pass for the corner 3. Lastly, one part of Garuba's game that hasn't been tapped into too much but really intrigues me is what he can do in grab-and-go situations. Similarly, Real Madrid did not encourage this too much, especially given their guard depth, but Garuba showed some very appealing signs. He isn't necessarily bringing the ball up and finishing the play himself, but just having a 6'8" guy that can start the fast break can be very useful, especially given Garuba's rebounding. He can quickly get his team up the floor, which leads to advantages like open threes, rim runners getting the ball, or free throws. In particular, I was left wanting more after seeing Garuba's game against Fuenlabrada. Here, he is able to bring up the ball at full speed under significant pressure and dish it off to Poirier for the jam. Again, here, it's another great pass on the move from Garuba as he jets up the floor and generates the wide open tray. Defensively, Garuba is much further ahead in his development than on the other end of the floor. Starting with his work in the pick and roll, Garuba has shown that he can defend as a big in those scenarios. He can come up high on screens, contain the guard, and then scramble back to his big. Garuba is patient playing the angles and he rarely makes hasty decisions. Like I said earlier, he is not the biggest, but he makes up for that with his smart decision making. Like I'll get into shortly, I'm still hesitant to truly call Garuba a big, but he can at least play that role guarding screens. He is nimble, alert, and can move sideways and backwards. Watch here in the EuroLeague as Garuba stifles the pick and roll attempt, then executes the closeout properly and forces the miss. Here, versus Fenerbahce, Garuba switches and just about blocks the pull-up 3. On a similar note, all of those things that I just mentioned also give Garuba good potential to defend in space. I still want to see him do this against guards more often, but the signs are encouraging. That being said, I am curious to see what Garuba looks like in space when he has to deal with the pace of the NBA. How he fares off against the additional skill level and athleticism of guards remains to be seen. Garuba can also make defensive plays away from the ball, which is a role that he can definitely play at the next level. Garuba's defensive awareness is one part of his game that is advanced for his age. Of course, it also helps that he's been playing with real defensive stakes for most of his career. Real Madrid expect to be contenders nationally and continentally most years, so Garuba had to get up to pace on D if he expected time on the floor. Watch here against Barcelona. Garuba follows the play, makes himself big, and stays vertical to deter the shot, and finally seals the possession with the rebound. Some of those defensive instincts also pop up as blocks. Garuba is at his best as a help side defender, but he can also rack up highlight plays with chase down rejections. It goes back to what I said earlier about his speed north to south, as well as his general intensity and awareness. Watch this big block here, for example. I also quickly want to touch on Garuba's post defense, not so much because of how he looks there, but because of what it means. I don't expect Garuba to face a lot of post-ups in the NBA, but in a more post-heavy environment like the EuroLeague, he rose up to the challenge. His chiseled upper body and strong lower base allow him to be physical in a way that most 19-year-olds cannot be. Even at quote-unquote just 6'8", Garuba can stifle bigs down low. This possession against 6'10" Brandon Davis is a good example. However, Garuba's size also comes with some limitations. I've been saying all video that he plays with great effort and energy. That's still true, but Garuba is simply too small at times. I'm apprehensive about saying that he can play at the 5 or be a small ball center because I'm really not sure how that translates to the NBA. Playing Garuba there would bring some advantages for sure, but unlike Draymond Green for example, he has not shown enough yet as a passer or scorer in my opinion. The biggest concern I have about Garuba though is actually how he comes out to the perimeter. Like I broke down earlier, I feel like he's mostly good or at least okay guarding in space, but he has a tendency to get sucked into the paint too deep and then struggle to close out to 3-point shooters. Some of this I'm sure was by design just because of how Real Madrid played, but I was also surprised at how uncomfortable Garuba looked at times given how nimble he is. There were a few occasions such as in this clip where Garuba was both slow and very sloppy closing out. He would overshoot the closeout, making it really easy for his defender to get past him and get a good look at the rim. Given how much shooting from deep there is in the NBA, both for bigs and guards, this is something Garuba has to improve at. Okay, so I find USMAN GARUBA to be a pretty fascinating prospect, not just based on what he brings on the floor, which we'll get into in a little bit, but generally just what it speaks to in terms of development for young players. Now, I said it in the video, Garuba for most of his life, at least in basketball terms, was physically dominant over his competition, to laughable levels really. I mean, he was a man among boys. And, you know, at the youth levels, obviously that had its advantages. He really solidified himself as a prospect, and well, he lived up to the promise, at least to some extent. However, we're also seeing the shortcomings of that, particularly on the offensive end. Garuba is still so raw offensively, and I mean, you can see some flashes in terms of, you know, like I said in the video, he can catch and finish. He can play as the roll man, get to the rim, get downhill, and dunk it. He's pretty good at that, but that's still really a very limited role, especially if you're 6'8" and there are still questions about the rest of his game. That means his three-pointer, that will really need to come around hopefully. His passing, we've seen some flashes, but how much of it was the system at Real Madrid? How much of it was himself making those reads? I'm fairly optimistic on it, but the sample size is still pretty small in my opinion. So we really need to see how those things develop in the NBA. And of course, just the fact that he really struggles to score right now. I mean, if Garuba played in an NBA game tomorrow, what would his role be offensively? Genuinely, I'm not sure. And even though Alperen Şengün might be worse defensively than Garuba at this stage, at least you know what he's bringing to the table offensively. However, on the defensive end of the basketball, I have a lot less questions about Garuba. I still want to see him, like I said earlier, more against NBA caliber guards, but the tools are there for him to guard in space, be effective in pick and roll, be good in help side defense, and generally just be a defensive playmaker around the floor. My biggest doubt is whether or not he will truly be able to play as a 5. I think that he has some rim protection, but he is also a little bit too small. He's not that explosive, he's athletic, but he can't really get off the floor that quickly. So I'm not sure how that will play out, but like I said in the video, if he can get to a point where he can play the 5, even if it's just in small ball scenarios, I really do think that will lead to advantages for his team. Finally, as you guys know, and like I've said on the channel multiple times, I'm not a huge fan of player comparisons. I think that a lot of the times they can be unfair or, you know, lead to unreasonable expectations. However, I've seen Garuba compared a lot to Draymond Green. I don't know about that comparison. I can see the shades of Green in Garuba, but at the end of the day, I think that someone who is more similar to him is actually Alize Johnson, who was on the Brooklyn Nets last season, who was with the Chicago Bulls this preseason, and I think they have a lot of similarities in terms of, you know, they can handle the ball in the open court a little, they're not really jump shooters, they're versatile defensively, they have really good, mature physical bodies. But we will have to see how Garuba's development pans out, and I'm very intrigued to see him in his first year in Houston. On a personal note, I also wanted to thank you guys for the support. Like I posted on here a couple weeks ago, my laptop got stolen. It was an unfortunate situation. No one got hurt, thankfully, which is good. I had to, you know, produce this video, edit it, do all of it on the computers at my university, which are quite good, but you know, it's still not the same thing. Still, I appreciate the support. I'm back now. I'm back with this video. I'll have another video next week as always, and then very shortly we will get into the 2022 NBA draft, which promises to be just as exciting as the 2021. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, make sure to leave a comment telling me what you think of USMAN Garuba, and if you enjoy the channel, if you want to see more content like this, make sure to subscribe. Take care, and I'll see you guys next time.